Too many people refuse to think of substance abuse as a problem that affects them. The truth is that most people are related to, work with, or otherwise know someone who lives with an addiction. Even if you can't immediately identify some person you know who has a substance abuse problem, addiction still affects you. Your tax dollars are paying for the social problems caused by addiction. Substance abuse involving illegal drugs, cigarettes, prescription drugs, and alcohol contribute to virtually every domestic problem our nation faces. Crime, unemployment, child abuse and neglect, overcrowding of the prison system, teen pregnancy, increased healthcare costs, chronic welfare, the spread of AIDS and other diseases, the number of kids in foster care, as well as the high school dropout rate. Substance abuse affects everybody.
What happens is that it has a deleterious effect right down the line. It doesn't just affect the person that's using. And it's just like when a person that decides to sell, that's another person involved in that whole process. And then there are people that decide to steal in order to get, and then they hurt people and other things happen. You have petty pilfering, you have other things that happen in the community because of it. And so everybody gets affected.
When you have such a economic unbalance, it provides an instant income stream for a lot of those who would normally be in the workforce.
It's definitely affecting our community. I work at the high-intensity drug trafficking area, which is located downtown, and as a liaison to Homeland Security, I get to see firsthand the numbers, the stats, what's going on as far as in our community. Our ground operation team actually goes out and they assist the law enforcement agencies, and I got a chance to do that also. And you get into these communities and you see kids outside playing, but yet we have 2 or 3 dope houses. You know, dope houses don't bring nothing but trouble.
In 1998, the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University conducted a study of the cost of substance abuse to the states. Their findings were startling. This study, titled Shoveling Up: The Impact of Substance Abuse on States' Budgets, revealed that the average $620 billion that most states spend on social programs at that time, $81.3 billion, or 13.1%, were used to prevent and treat substance abuse addiction. In other words, of every tax dollar spent, 4 cents was spent on programs that deal with the root cause of many of our social problems. The other 96 cents of every dollar was spent on treating the problems that result from substance abuse. The report labels this phenomenon shoveling up the wreckage. What does this mean to you? In 1998, $277 a year of the average taxpayer's money paid for government programs that deal with the problems caused by substance abuse. But only $10 a year was spent on programs to prevent or stop substance abuse addiction. Translated into today's dollars, that's $361.81 that the average taxpayer spends to shovel up the problems, and only $13.06 to treat the root cause of these problems. This does not make any sense. If your car is leaking antifreeze, do you just keep paying to put more antifreeze in it, hoping that your car will not overheat and break down, or do you fix the leak? We need to take a different approach to dealing with substance abuse prevention and treatment. As a society, in order to ultimately reduce our expenses, have healthier citizens, reduce crime, reduce poverty, help more families leave public assistance, have a good workforce, reduce the number of kids in the foster care system, and improve our overall way of life, first, we need to make treatment programs more widely available so that the people who have an addiction problem can get the help they need. So how did we get into our current situation? One of the biggest barriers to dealing with the problem of addiction is the stigma that society has placed on people who have an addiction. Even once they're in recovery, people are still reluctant to discuss their past because they might be judged. Historically, people who have an addiction of any type are labeled weak because people have the misconception that addiction is something people choose to do.
People think that they make choices to use drugs or use alcohol. They got themselves into it, and all they got to do is have the willpower or pull themselves up by the bootstraps to be able to get better, to get away from it. And I think that's still very prominent in our society. And there's still, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people in this state that are in recovery, but you don't know it because they're afraid that if somebody finds out that they were in recovery at the time, or that they were in using drugs, it could cost them their job, or it could influence on whether or not they get a promotion or something like that. So that still exists, I think, out there.
We have a long way to go before we will fully understand all the aspects of addiction. Until that time, we are asking people to challenge their preconceived ideas about addiction, to stop thinking about addiction as something that people can control if they really want to challenge the idea that addiction is something people choose. To better understand this, let's take a look at the human brain. Feelings of pleasure in the brain happen when cells, named neurons, release a neurotransmitter called dopamine. The dopamine passes from one neuron to another in a chain reaction. As the dopamine passes across a small gap called a synapse, it binds to the receptors of another neuron, causing that neuron to then release its own dopamine to the next neuron. This transmission of dopamine provides a jolt of pleasure in the brain. In the brains of people who are not addicted, excess dopamine is absorbed back into the neuron that released it. Other neurons that are present will release an inhibitory neurotransmitter known as gamma-aminobutyric acid that prevents overstimulation of the receptor nerve. Drugs and alcohol increase the amount of dopamine that is released in the brain. Research shows that repeated use of these substances can actually work to block the uptake of the excess dopamine and the release of the gamma-aminobutyric acid. This ultimately leads to a breakdown of communication in the brain, specifically in the frontal lobe where planning, abstract thought, and regulation of impulse behavior are governed. A person who is addicted to something does not have the ability to recognize that what they are doing will hurt them physically, could cause them to lose their job, family, friends, or house. Many people who have experienced addiction describe it as a compulsion. They sometimes don't even remember how they obtained the drugs or alcohol. Their bodies just needed it, and as if they were on autopilot, they went out and got what their bodies told them it needed. For people who have never experienced addiction, this type of behavior is impossible to understand. For them, not picking up a cigarette, not ordering alcohol with dinner, not looking for a hit, is something they choose not to do because they know it's harmful. These people who are not addicts then transfer what they know, their own experiences, onto people who are addicts. They believe people who are addicted should simply choose not to do it. This is where the social stigma of addiction is born.